It was the signature pitch of the election campaign.
For 1.2 million homes for Australians.
Last year and in 5 years' time, 1.2 million.
We're building more affordable housing.
But Treasury says it won't happen. The 1.2 million new homes target will not be met.
We need to do more and we need to do better to hit that target in 4 years' time.
Do you still believe the target can be met?
Yes.
The advice is contained in a brief prepared for Treasurer Jim Chalmers and obtained through the Freedom of Information or FOI process. But the Treasury didn't delete a table of contents that gives an insight into big challenges and contentious suggestions.
That sort of thing happens from time to time. I'm pretty relaxed about it, to be honest.
The heading suggests taxes would need to be raised, and the budget needs both additional revenue and spending reductions to make it sustainable.
We do have to get real about raising more tax, and we also have to get real about spending. We have to do both. We can't really avoid the hard choices here.
I don't think it's particularly surprising that the Treasury has highlighted, as I have personally, that we need to do more to make the budget more sustainable.
The advice was written by Treasury and given after Labor's re-election. The Secretary then, Stephen Kennedy, now runs the Prime Minister's department. Treasury realised its mistake and tried to get the ABC to bin the document, but the broadcaster argues the information is in the public interest.
We absolutely need more frank and fearless advice. We need that happening behind the scenes, but wouldn't it be great if we had it in the public domain too?
It helps to promote the conversation ahead of what is a very important round table, and the more those issues, particularly challenging ones like tax reform, are aired prior to the round table, the better it is.
The government is already planning to double the earnings tax on superannuation balances above $3 million. A headline in the Treasury document talks about building on that reform.
What Mr Albanese has to explain to the Australian people is what those higher taxes are.
The detail suggests Treasury favours lower taxes for individuals and companies and changing parts of the indirect tax system of excises, stamp duty and the GST. In housing, the new minister is advised to use migration and the skills system to boost the construction workforce and leverage grants to states and territories to make them build more homes. There's also discussion of money for enabling infrastructure, things like pipes and sewers, which was a $5 billion coalition policy at the recent election.
Tremendous amounts of money are coming in.
The notes also reveal Treasury has modelled the consequences for the Australian economy of a loss of confidence in the US dollar and the independence of its central bank, the Federal Reserve.
The US President is completely unpredictable. We know that his economic decisions are not based on sensible policy advice like we see from our own Treasury, and therefore anything could happen.
Treasury didn't want you to know this information, but what it reveals is a department unafraid of its own boss, giving frank and fearless advice about key economic issues.
Thanks very much.
A document that asks tough questions of the Treasurer and all of us.
For more on what we can glean from the secret Treasury document, I spoke to Pradeep Phillip, a former senior public servant in the Victorian government and now a lead partner at Deloitte Access Economics. Welcome. Why would Treasury be trying to prevent the release of this sort of material?
Look, what this episode tells us is that Secretary Kennedy was providing frank and fearless advice to the Treasurer. And if you think about these topics, they're really important topics for the government to be considering. And sometimes, frank and fearless advice should be provided in private, but clearly here there are some public interest questions at stake. And so we're now having a conversation about things that we should be having a conversation about. The first is about kind of tax reform. The second is around housing. And the third, thinking about the uncertainty and volatility that's occurring overseas and what impact that has for Australia.
On tax reform and reading between the lines, because that's all we've got, what do you think Treasury's specific recommendations to government in this brief were?
Look, it's not surprising that we are having a debate about tax reform. And if you think about the resistance people have, for instance, to immigration, along with an ageing population, we'll find that more and more of the income tax burden will fall on an ever shrinking working age population of Australians. So we need to be thinking about tax reform that engineers a tax mix switch. That is, reducing our reliance on income tax and increasing the tax burden on other tax bases, indirect tax bases, the taxation of capital, the taxation of wealth. So it's really important that we have that debate on how we reduce our reliance on income tax. The second is, this goes to the question about the sustainability of the budget. Are we raising enough revenue efficiently and equitably to fund the sort of investments in social services, in economic transformation, and increasingly this call for more spending on defence? The third thing that it allows us to do is have a better debate about roles and responsibilities between the Commonwealth and the states to make sure that the Federation is working efficiently. And why have all of this, Kirsten? Because what we want to do is make sure that the tax system is raising the appropriate amount of revenue efficiently and equitably, that it's biasing our tax system towards economic activity, which is about lifting business investment, because that's the best way to lift productivity and deliver higher living standards. So these are the sorts of things that they should be, we would hope, would be in this brief.
On indirect taxes, is Treasury likely to have recommended to government to increase the GST?
Look, it's very hard to say, but this is something that's incumbent on business, community and indeed state and territory governments to come to a view about this. We know that while the GST is a highly regressive tax, it is also an incredibly efficient tax. So the question is not just about the GST base and rate per se, but what are the other things you do? What's really important in this tax reform debate is to not have piecemeal tax changes, but to have true reform. And if reforming the GST could see us get rid of inefficient taxes, particularly at the state and territory level, then that could be a really good boost for the Australian economy.
And so can major economic reform that sees personal and company taxes cut take place without changes to the GST and further changes to the tax treatment of superannuation?
Look, it just makes it really hard unless you have comprehensive tax reform. And the reason is because when you just focus on a couple of things, it's really hard to drive the broader economic dividends that could take place when you think about tax on different tax bases. Now, one of the things that is taking place is that the economy is changing rapidly. And so we've got to make sure that our tax system is fit for purpose, that we are taxing things that are now emerging as new tax bases, and that we're not creating disincentives in the system because we're taxing things that we've just taxed in the past. So it's really important for us to have a debate about comprehensive tax reform, because this is the best way for us to think about our economic future going forward. How do we bias the tax system towards more business investment to lift productivity and therefore lift living standards?
Do you expect that Treasury advised, or that the government is considering, further changes to the way superannuation is taxed over and above the current proposal to double tax on earnings for balances above $3 million?
Look, superannuation is an incredible success story for the Australian economy. And it's grown like this because there's been tax preferred treatment. But now we've got to the stage where there are now, instead of being just in an accumulation phase of super, we're now getting towards the payout of super. And so what we need to do is think of this $4 trillion kind of investment vehicle in Australia as a important tax base and get to more equitable tax arrangements going forward. Now, the current proposal on superannuation tax has some good things going for it. It has some negative things going for it. But the key thing is, how do you match this up with other reforms so you can get a better outcome that's about an efficient and effective tax system? So you would think that going forward, we would have a broader debate about the taxation of superannuation.
What is your read on Treasury's modelling of the impacts arising from a loss of confidence in the US dollar, as well as the independence of the US Federal Reserve? And does it suggest that the government is much more concerned about Donald Trump's economic policies than is it saying in public?
Look, it's not surprising that Treasury has done this modelling, because this is what it has always done and it's what you would expect it to do. We are definitely seeing major changes in the global economy driven by geopolitics. And this is really important for Australia to get a good grasp on. So it's not surprising that Treasury has done this modelling, because what we're starting to see is, with a lot of flip-flopping of policy, changes that are being made, change to global economic institutions, that there is now a risk premium that is being placed on activities that we've seen as risk-free for a long period of time. So it's really important for the Australian government to understand the implications of it, to think about our own domestic settings. Because one of the things, Kirsten, you can do when you see all this uncertainty and volatility overseas that we can't do much about, you can focus on what we can do. And that is about building a more robust, sustainable, resilient economy here, with an eye to all the geopolitical changes that are now driving geoeconomics.
Pradeep, Philip, thank you.